suggests that something has gone wrong. That's it for amenorrhea. It's pretty straightforward. Polycystic ovary syndrome is not pretty straightforward. And you are going to have what I believe is a very, very accurate view of it by learning about it from a metabolic scientist. Because many people believe, like OBGYNs and fertility specialists, that we should not call this disorder PCOS. It should be called metabolic infertility. So this is about 15% of all women, getting more common every year as metabolic disorders are becoming more common every year. It is typically defined by the so-called Rotterdam criteria: hyperandrogenism, so too high of testosterone; oligomenorrhea, meaning she's not experiencing normal menstrual cycles, it's infrequent; and the polycystic ovaries. You do an ultrasound of the ovaries and it is just littered with these little cysts, these follicles turned cysts. In fact, there can be such an abundance of these cysts that the normal palm-sized, not even smaller than that, ovaries can turn into something like this. These are massive ovaries with, you see the fallopian tubes sort of trying to pull up all the eggs. Well, there's none because these just aren't ovulating. There's never an ovulation. So PCOS is a disease of hyperinsulinemia. So most women with PCOS have confirmed insulin resistance. But even in those women who haven't had confirmed insulin resistance, what's so interesting is that usually the first course of treatment is to put the woman on an insulin sensitizing medication like metformin. Why would metformin, an insulin sensitizing medication, be used to treat an infertility if it weren't a metabolic problem, which it is? So basically, the series of events looks like this. We have the ovary, which has aromatase, the enzyme that converts androgens to estrogens, turning testosterone into the estrogens. Well, the female has very little need of androgens when it comes to ovulation. And so it's no surprise in this female body that a lot of that androgen is taken up and converted via aromatase into estrogens. But as the body's experiencing higher levels of insulin, insulin begins to inhibit aromatase. That means what was once a big amount of estrogens becomes a very small amount of estrogens, and subsequently much higher levels of androgens. That, of course, is what leads to the hyperandrogenism. But this problem, the high androgens, but the low estrogens is what leads to the inability to ovulate, because there must be the so-called estrogen spike in the cycle, which actually will take the little follicles in the ovary and say, okay, one of you, it's time to ovulate. That's the estrogens. The estrogens will basically kick out one of the follicles and say, open up and ovulate. Once that has happened, all the other follicles that have been developing, because there are multiple follicles developing in either or both ovaries each month, they are degraded. They get kind of worked back in and apoptosed and degraded into nothing because one of them ovulated. But if you don't have an estrogen spike, you have all these follicles that were developing, but none of them can go away because they need one of them to ovulate, and they don't, and they stick around. And then the next month they stick around, and then the next month they stick around. But just to show you how powerful this effect is of insulin increasing androgen release from the ovaries, this is what happens when ovary cells are incubated with high levels of insulin. You can see that the amount of testosterone, the primary androgen, goes up by like 13 or 14 times compared to normal, the control treated ovary cells. So this is a fantastically increased effect, resulting in the disrupted ovulation and the hyperandrogenism. And of course, it's the hyperandrogenism that gives the woman other features of PCOS, like hair on the face and even male pattern baldness. She can start to go thinning on the crown of the head. These are the features of the hyperandrogenism, which again is being driven by the high insulin. Now let's look at all of this in a slightly different view, because is it possible that there's a role for AMH, which is also called malarian inhibiting substance, but I generally just want to refer to it as AMH now, because that's the more typical, but it's the same thing. Is there a role for AMH? So basically, this is the one view of this. With much of this is factual, of course. It's just the theory of what other series of events here. So firstly, we have follicular stimulating hormone, FSH, that's coming from the pituitary down to the ovaries, and that stimulates follicle development. Well, AMH, anti-malarian hormone, which women do have in very, very low levels, they don't have Sertoli cells, but they do have those theca cells that produce a little bit of it. Well, what if she's producing too much? AMH will block FSH. So this hormone, AMH, will block FSH, meaning the follicles can't stimulate, can't be stimulated to develop. Normally, estrogens at high levels, like it should be in a female, particularly during the estrogen spike, will block AMH. You see where I'm going with this? So in the normal female, estrogens, or in a healthy female, estrogens would block AMH, which would remove the AMH block of FSH, so FSH could work. However, in PCOS, too much insulin blocks estrogen production because of its effects on what enzyme? Aromatase. So I just described this in a backwards series of events. Now let's play it back in a forwards series of events. High insulin would be the first step here, due to insulin resistance, which itself would be due to various lifestyle variables and a genetic predisposition to becoming insulin resistant. The high insulin would result in lower estrogens via the inhibition of aromatase. Where estrogens are now too low, that means AMH is not blocked. So AMH is higher than normal. And with higher AMH, we have more blocking of FSH. And this is why this series of events, by all means, play this back. This is why AMH can be used as a marker of PCOS. And indeed, improving insulin resistance in a female with PCOS will lower her AMH, giving some credence to this overall viewpoint that AMH could be relevant here. This could be an additional aspect of this pathology of PCOS. Okay, now let's end the female fertility disorders with a discussion of endometrial